Today's video class will be about one of my favorite Sonoran dishes, and I probably, of course, say this about every Sonoran dish, but this really is one of my favorite. And there's a funny thing about the people of the state of Sonora and of the Sonoran Desert that even though it's a very, very hot environment, there's quite a few soups that are in the cuisine and that are eaten very regularly. Sonoran people are not one of those where it's like, oh, it has to be cold in order for me to have soup. It's more of like if you can't beat the heat, you join it, you know, and so you have a nice big bowl of steaming soup so that you can just profusely sweat throughout the day or just for that moment, and so then you are more at peace with the heat. So we're going to make caldo de queso, which is a Sonoran cheese soup, and it's a cheese soup that is as opposed to, let's say, like a Wisconsin cheddar cheese soup. It doesn't feel like you ate a brick. Okay, it's a very light soup. It's vegetarian. It's just a really simple water and milk based broth with potatoes, onions, and tomatoes, and then you finish it off with the queso fresco, which has the wonderful quality of getting melty but also keeping its shape, and it's spiked of course with chile tatemados. I normally would say roasted, but it's actually more of a toasted chili. So I'm gonna change up the view, and then we're gonna get started on doing some knife cuts and roasting those chilies, and we can talk about what I call northern Mexican bat signal. Okay. So we're gonna start the cooking process today with getting our Anaheim chiles toasted tatemados. Okay. And I'm simply putting them, that's one of my favorite sounds, is that first little popping sound that you hear when you put them directly on the heat or on a grill. Ideally, I want to do these maybe over mesquite charcoal, okay? But doing them over something like a open flame on a burner, just totally correct. The important thing with this step is to make sure you don't overcook the chilies. So you want to go at a, low, medium heat. And you want to, it's a nice slow toasting process. You don't want to rush the process. You want to make sure that you don't overcook the chili, because if you do, it becomes really mushy. It loses its shape and it loses out on a lot of its juice and its flavor. So it's a slight blackening of the skin, and then also allowing that chili to rest so that the skin separates from the chili itself. So I'm gonna let those cook while I do the rest of my knife cuts, okay? Which won't be a whole lot for this. This is such a wonderful, easy, and satisfying soup. So we're going to start with a white onion. This could be either a white or a yellow onion, okay? And just one. Usually you want an onion that's, what they refer to as a medium onion will be one that's about 8 to 9 ounces, so about half a pound, okay? Small, I would say, would probably be more in that like 4 ounce region, okay? So we're going to cut our onions into julienne. So it will be about a 1/4 inch strip. Okay, most of the time you'll see recipes will be like, oh, cut them into a dice, which is fine for things like a sauce of some kind, okay? But on something like this where it's going to be a soup, I think a julienne, it's a nice long 1/4 inch strip. It's going to give you better presence of that onion in the soup. You'll actually be able to tell that it's there. And if you're putting an ingredient into your soup, might as well be able to see it. So, nice easy grip on my knife. I'm gonna go ahead and, following the curvature of the onion, I'm just going to cut 1/4 inch strips all the way around, okay? Turn my onion over and keep going. Nice thing about doing the julienne versus the 1/4 inch dice, takes a fraction of the time to do the cut. Cutting onions, that really great opportunity to find out about little scrapes in your skin that you didn't know you had, like one I have apparently here right now. Those onion juices kind of hurt a little bit. So This is my knife's best friend. It should be your knife's best friend too. It's called a bench scraper. You get it under whatever you just cut, get it out of the way rather than using the back of your knife or the blade of your knife to pick up whatever you were just cutting, okay? Makes your life so much easier. I continue to check my chilies and turn them and move them around as needed. You can, of course, just use your hands. You can use your pair of tongs. So, next thing that's going to be our soup base is going to be our tomatoes, okay? Didn't wash these. I'm gonna go ahead and wash them now. So you want either, it could be Roma, beefsteak, whichever kind of tomatoes. Just make sure it's nice and mature, okay? Nice and ripe, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and get out that little core right here. Just dig it out with my knife. So, nice ripe tomatoes, okay? So now for the tomatoes, you can use Roma, beefsteak, or and like a hothouse tomato, of course. Heirloom tomatoes, if you have them around, would be ideal since they'll have the most flavor. But you just want to make sure they're nice ripe tomatoes, okay? No orange, yellow tomatoes. Still should be nice and ripe. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut them in half, okay? Now I am gonna go ahead and cut this into 1/4-inch dice. So I'm gonna do a horizontal cut here and another one here. And with the tip of my knife, go in and dice my knife. Okay, these last little bits I sort of just cut like that. And I want to make sure I keep everything, you know, I'm keeping the seeds, I'm keeping that juice. All the seeds and the juice, you know, if you're doing French cuisine, traditional French cuisine, you're always going to get rid of your skin on the tomatoes and the seeds in the tomatoes. Thankfully, this is Sonoran food, and we like flavor in our food. So we keep the seeds, we keep the skin. They can occasionally add a little bit of you know, slightly bitter or tannic flavor, but that's fine. This is not a super delicate dish, so that little bit of extra flavor is going to help you out. And it's going to be a little bit less prep time than rather than having to, see, I went too far with my knife, pops it off, okay? So then I just go ahead, cut it into strips, okay, get it out of the way. So more tomato juice equals more flavor. So don't bother straining out the seeds and getting rid of any of that. Oh, not too much cool. Okay. The only problem with using very ripe tomatoes is that they're going to be a little bit on the soft side. So sometimes cutting them up is a little bit more work than using a firmer tomatoes. Okay, so I'm gonna finish these and keep rotating my chilies as needed. As my peppers are now done, I'm gonna go ahead and cut my potatoes. The potatoes, you wanna make sure you cut to an even size, okay? And I just started getting produce delivery from a company called Imperfect Produce. And they take produce that has minor flaws, either too small in size, irregular in shape, or some form of minor cosmetic flaw, and make sure that it ends up being eaten. Okay, so instead of being discarded. So really good company, not sponsored or anything, just a good company. Okay, so my potatoes, it's about a pound, maybe just a tiny bit over. Okay, and you want to make sure you cut those potatoes at roughly the same size so that you don't end up with a raw potato and a completely overcooked potato. So I'm doing Yukon Gold potatoes for this because they're going to cook and become soft and creamy but still hold its shape. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my pot set up and we're going to get started on this process. I have my pot heating up here, and you may be wondering why I'm using one of these little burners, butane burner, rather than my stove that's right next to this burner that I've set up. I have one of those awful electric glass stovetops, not the induction ones, the regular glass ones, that has the really cool ability to be hot, cold, and medium all at the same time. So for some dishes, and especially for when I'm shooting these videos, I much rather use this little stovetop that heats much more quickly and more evenly, and you know, they're super affordable, they're super efficient, and they're really handy. So I have my pot heating up here, no fat in it until it gets warm, okay? And I recently read an article about that studied the properties of olive oil, and traditionally people have been taught olive oil after 350 degrees start smoking, start tasting awful. Well, if you do heat it up too much, it will taste a little bit off, but for most regular cooking, you are better off using olive oil for the nutritional properties, and the fact that it doesn't actually break down those properties in cooking, rather than using a canola or definitely a corn oil, which can be GMOs, they can be estrogenic, they're much more likely to carry some form of pesticide still in them. So go ahead and start using the olive oil for all your cooking. Just make sure it's, you know, it's a nice good one. So a little bit of olive oil there, just enough to coat that bottom, okay? And I'm gonna add my julienne onions. So I'm going to let these, I'm gonna coat these, toss them around, and let these start to cook for a couple of minutes. We're only, before I salt, okay? We're only trying to soften these up and get them to translucent. We're not trying to get any color on them. But I'm going to wait a little bit until adding salt, because salting too soon might get a little bit too much water to start coming out from the onion. So then they'll kind of be more mushy, stewed onions rather than a nice softened onion. So we're going to let them sit for a little bit. And by the way, if we are going to discuss olive oil, in general, I do not look for or purposely buy Italian olive oil, since you're kind of paying extra for it being referred to as an Italian olive oil. Though historically speaking, and then still to the modern day, Italy has not been a olive producing region. It imports. It has since the Roman times. So, and I generally prefer a Greek or Spanish or actually Tunisian olive oil. They're a little bit stronger in flavor, just more robust overall, a little bit darker in color. And I tend to prefer also unfiltered olive oil. So apparently I'm an olive oil snob. I apologize. So these have now started to heat up. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a sprinkle of salt. Using a fine sea salt here. Normally I use kosher salt a lot. I prefer usually diamond kosher salt because it doesn't have any caking agents in it. And it has a really nice granule size. But sea salt, kosher salt, either one is fine. We want to definitely make sure that our onions are at that nice, translucent, soft point before we add our tomatoes to it. When you add something with acid, such as tomatoes, to your pot, you're actually effectively shortening or stopping that softening process, okay? So you want to make sure you have your things sweated out or softened to the point where you want them before you might season your proteins with an acid. Okay, so we're gonna let these go a little bit longer. As the onions cook, I'm gonna go ahead and start slicing up that queso fresco. Okay, so you get nice little wheels. These are about 10-ounce wheels of each one. And queso fresco is, think of it as similar to a feta, but of course feta has that goat, sheep milk, extra brine lump, but similar texture, okay? So they're totally identical, but nothing alike. I apologize for this. So, nice firm cheese, okay? If you go to split it, you see a nice tight curd there. Most of the whey has been pressed out. And they're usually done in little baskets, okay? The milk is mixed with rennet, with the natural enzymes from the stomach, or a vegetable rennet, whichever. And it's allowed to coagulate. That curd is then slightly broken up and gently cooked enough so that it starts sticking together. Okay, so my onions are softened enough now. I'm gonna go ahead, add my tomatoes and any of the juice that came out. Give everything a nice mix. Gonna go ahead and add a little bit more salt and turn up my heat a bit, since all those juices from the tomatoes are going to drop the temperature a lot. So we're going to let the tomatoes and the onions cook for a little while. So continuing back to the cheese, okay, those curds, once they are all they come back together, get scooped out and put into little basket molds of about yay big. And while they're in the mold, they get lightly pressed so that the whey comes out, okay? One of the other cheeses that is really popular throughout the Sonoran region, other than queso fresco, and it's done a lot in an artisanal level, is queso cocido. Okay, queso cocido follows the same process as queso fresco, except for when they get to that stage where the curd starts to come together. The curd, with a spoon, the curds are sort of lifted out and stretched and folded, and lifted out and stretched and folded, which tightens the curd together and makes for a really creamy, really wonderful cheese. But big difference between queso fresco and some other cheeses is that it's going to hold its shape. I'm going to cut these just a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to tear them by hand when I do that. And you can absolutely just crumble this by hand rather than using a knife. So the queso fresco is going to hold its shape while it's heating up, which is wonderful. So each one of those wheels was about 8 ounces. I really only needed 10 ounces, but queso fresco and I get along really well, and I have a very bad habit of just sitting there and eating the cheese while I am cooking. So I'm going to set it off to the side so I don't eat it all while my pot over here continues to cook. I'm going to turn down the heat now just a little bit and move it out of the way so we can see what we're going to do as far as cleaning up our chiles. As you can see, my tomatoes are nice and softened now, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and add my liquids, which is equal parts milk, whole milk, and water, okay? And it's half a gallon total, so 1 quart each. I'm going to just turn up my heat just a little bit, but you want to gently heat this while it's cooking so that you don't break your milk too much. I'm going to slowly add my potatoes here. Without splashing myself. And just give it a stir. Add a little bit of salt, not too much. Queso fresco is fairly salty, so you want to make sure you don't over salt your liquid, because then, it's just soup ruined, okay? So my chilies are now at a temperature where I can actually handle them freely, okay? So I'm going to use the same towel where I've wrapped them up. to just gently pull the skin off. The skin's coming off fairly easily. Okay, but please do me a favor, and of course, you know, wear gloves if you're more comfortable with handling chilies with gloves. My hands are, for the most part, pretty good about being able to handle the heat, and chile verdes are generally not that spicy, although the ones that I have grown here in my house, and they're not of a variety that's supposed to be really spicy, have been really insanely spicy. These are from the store, which you can tell by just how gigantic they are. Okay, but do me a favor. Don't run, or do yourself a favor, more like. Don't run chilies under water or dip them in water to be able to... That was my dog, by the way. To be able to better get the seeds and the skin off of them. Okay, you're going to lose a lot of your flavor while you do that. So it's better to just, you know, lose maybe, or maybe keep just a little bit of skin, keep a little bit of the seeds, or just take a longer period of time getting them clean rather than trying to rush it. Okay, then losing all your flavor underwater. I'm going to continue to clean these, and then we're going to tear them into bits. Okay, my chilies are peeled. Still some little bits, you know, of the blackened skin on the chilies and on my hands. I am okay with this. Okay, I like to leave those little bits. It's a little bit of extra flavor. I find it visually appealing. Of course, that is just me. If you want to get all the little bits off, that's completely fine. So just slightly, just made a score mark with my knife and open the chili. I'm going to take the back of my knife and scrape away the seeds, and you can also use it to peel up that rib. Don't worry too much about getting every single seed off. Again, seeds are going to give flavor. Okay, I mean, what would an okra be with no seeds? Just crunchy outer skin. You'll notice my my soup I'm keeping uncovered. I don't want to cover it because generally because of the dairy. Of course, you know, if it comes to a boil too hard, or if it, you know, if you stop watching it for a single second, dairy in a pot is going to boil over on you. Okay, so I'd rather keep it uncovered, keep a good eye on it, and just let it do its thing and take its time. Okay. And so for chilies, you can use your knife to do cuts. Okay, generally what I prefer is to simply just pull them with my hand. Okay, it's going to give you a little bit more of an irregular appearance sometimes, but just the chili fibers, you know, the strands themselves will separate. Sometimes there's just no need to get a knife involved, okay? And this is from somebody that's standing in front of a drawer full of knives. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and get them separated. So the last two things that are going to go into our soup are going to be the chili and the chile tatemado and the queso fresco, okay? Super simple soup, super satisfying. And even on 100 and some degree day, like it is today here in Phoenix in October, in the fall. Not completely unheard of, but still not pleasant. All right, so almost done with my chilies. Once my soup does start simmering, I'm gonna give it a taste, okay? And see where I am as far as salt. Those potatoes, you want to make sure you cook until just fork tender. Don't cook them too much, because even though it's a Yukon potato and they're more likely to hold their shape, they will start to crumble a little bit too much. So there are times, especially if after I taste the chilies and they do taste just a little bit too spicy, where I will simply leave them off as to be a garnish at the end. Okay, especially since my child's heat tolerance is kind of comes and goes. So she's young, she's 5, she can't help it. But you can either add them to the soup. I'll make sure I taste these, make sure if they're not too super spicy. And then of course you can always add extra to your own individual bowl. I'm going to get this cleaned up and then we'll keep going. While we are waiting for our soup to come to a nice simmer so that we can cook those potatoes, I'm going to add just a little bit of salt. Okay, let's talk about how to choose chile verde, the Anaheim chilies. Okay, you want to choose one that feels relatively heavy, that's going to have nice thick walls, and it's going to roast properly. It's going to toast tatemado, get tatemado nice without completely overcooking from the thinness of the walls. Okay, so it should feel nice and heavy and dense. I don't worry too much about scarring. If it has maybe some little brown scars on the outside, that's fine. But it should be a nice, even, uniform dark green color rather than like a yellowish color. So my soup's just now coming to a simmer, okay? And I'm going to add a little bit of cracked black pepper to this, okay? A lot of Mexican recipes don't include black pepper, because it was a relatively late addition into Mexican cuisine. This, however, is a modern Mexican cuisine, in particular to the state of Sonora. The state of Sonora is like the cattle ranching state of Mexico. The Sonoran climate is particularly well suited climate, and the topography is well suited to raising cattle. Lots of plains, grasslands, although there's quite a bit of regions here where the cows are up in the mountains and maybe they think they're goats, okay? They're perfectly happy living up in the mountains. So I'm gonna add some black pepper. And this is of course when I'm going to talk about how pepper is not seasoning. Pepper is a spice. Salt is a seasoning. Salt enhances flavor. Pepper is going to change flavor. Okay, I'm going to stop stirring this so much so that it actually gets to a nice steady simmer. So pepper, with black pepper, like I said earlier, you don't see it a lot in Mexican cuisine, and if you do, you see it in moles, where it's this very almost curry-like sauce where this wide variety of spices are toasted and then ground together. And so you'll see, the recipe will call for a certain number of whole peppercorns. You very rarely see in traditional Mexican cuisine, older Mexican cuisine, up until the early 20th century, you see more, you never see a line saying, and black pepper to taste. Black pepper is an expensive ingredient, even to this day. A really good quality black pepper, like a telly cherry peppercorn, is going to be expensive. So, in a lot of those Mexican dishes, put the black pepper down. This dish, at least at my house, my parents' house, always had a lot of black pepper in it because my mother's love for black pepper. Okay? So on this one, I'm going to give it a pass and say it's up to you. If you want black pepper in it, put black pepper in it. For me, because I associate this soup with my mother, of course, and with her love of black pepper, for me, it has to have black pepper or it doesn't taste right. Which is, this could then go on into a discussion about authenticity in cuisine and how, in my opinion, there is no such thing as an authentic recipe or as an authentic way to make a dish, because everyone's version of authentic is going to be different. So, like I said, my version of this dish has to have black pepper in it. I'm gonna let my pot simmer away nice until my potatoes are fork tender. Should be about 15 minutes if I stop poking around my pot. Okay, so I'm gonna let it sit and cook and enjoy itself for a little bit. Then we're gonna come back and add the Anaheim and the chile tatemado and add that queso fresco, which I'm gonna attempt to not eat as I'm sitting here waiting. My potatoes are now at that fork tender stage. Let me get one out so we can test it out together. Okay, fork tender stage, okay? You don't want to be able to crumble them as you do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and start adding my cheese, okay? Nice big chunks of cheese. Like I said, it's going to soften, but it won't lose its shape. Okay, and there's a little bit of whey that's left over in the dish. And I'm gonna go ahead and add that to my soup because, again, flavor. Okay, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and taste my soup. And no heat from the chilies. Good level of salt. Maybe I'll add some more black pepper. Feel like I should. And of course, soup is one of those things that it's always so much better the next day. So I might honestly not eat this until tomorrow because it will taste better. Like I was saying earlier, you could make it with chicken stock or vegetable stock if you wanted a richer broth. And unfortunately, I feel like this is one of those dishes that I would not see the point or understand the point of making it with vegan substitutions. Vegetarian, this is of course completely vegetarian as long as you don't substitute the water for chicken stock. But vegan substitutions wouldn't make sense as far as the place where the dish comes from. Comes from a cattle ranching region where, you know, beef and cow and cheese and milk just reign supreme. So I'm 100% for vegetarian and vegan food. Vegan food, I make fantastic vegan food, and I enjoy eating vegan quite a bit. But it doesn't translate. I'm going to ladle just a little bit of that soup so I can try it out now. I guess, you know, and of course everybody knows this about soup. Soup always so much better the day after. Whenever I'm making pozole, I make it the day before I actually want to eat it. Because it's going to be so much better afterwards. I'm gonna add just a little bit more of those chile tatemados. And of course, this is still smoking hot. So good, rich broth without being overwhelmingly so. There's not so much tomato in it that it gets to be really acidic, and this isn't going to be one of those Top Chef moments where, oh, it needs more salt and it needs more acid. Okay, it's fine on level of salt and acid. It's one of those dishes that really proves that Mexican people don't put lime juice and cilantro on everything. Okay, but nice flavor, you know, richness from the potato and the starch that goes in, the starch that releases from the potatoes to release into the liquid itself. And I like the difference of cutting the onions into a long julienne strip that, you know, about 1/4 inch, 2 inch long strip, rather than dicing it, because it gives the onions a bit more presence in the dish than a small, you know, 1/4 inch dice would. So a little bit of potato. And of course our star ingredient, the cheese, that holds its shape but gets melty and gets soft. And this is why I love queso fresco for if you're going to make tamales de elote, what's referred to as green corn tamales in the Tucson and generally Arizona, New Mexico area. Queso fresco is going to give you that nice chunk of filling where it's soft, it gets gooey enough without, you know, coming out all over the place as you're eating your tamal. But really, a wonderful soup. I might put a little bit more cracked black pepper into it, just give it a little bit more richness. Maybe just a teeny bit more salt. But I'd rather let that dish sit and infuse until tomorrow, and then come back and revisit my soup and see if I'm going to need to add any seasoning to it. But otherwise, this is, you know, such a wonderful and typically Sonoran dish to have. Super easy to make, not at all intimidating, very accessible ingredients, which is, I think, one of the reasons why it's so successful of a dish. And so hopefully you have enjoyed this video, and we'll come back for another class.